Good morning, everyone. My forecast this morning for the entire New England area is as follows.
You always think back of the old days and you say things were better. Some things were better.
This is a nice city to live in. Everything here, you had everything here you had anyone else, in the other place.
There was really no skyline. Everything was really, the buildings were really shot.
If you went into Boston, you got all dressed up. I'd put on my best clothes and high heels and gloves and a hat.
At Haymarket Square, you could spend $10, have fresh meats, vegetables for a month.
For relaxation, so many nightclubs. It was so great. A lot of trios playing. For $2 or $3, you had dinner, and we used to call it a floor show.
Boston was really a rabbit warren. It was a labyrinth with all these curvy, twisty streets, and it was a very intimate city.
Everybody loved the Braves, and that was the year that the Red Sox lost the playoffs.
We weren't afraid. There was no fear. People kept their doors open.
Good evening. I'm Tom O'Connor, professor of history at Boston College. For the past 40 years or so, one of my favorite classes has dealt with the history of Boston. Why? Well, maybe it's because I was born in South Boston and spent most of my life here. It seemed like the most natural thing to do. But I think there was more to it than that. Boston is like a thick stew, bubbling over with its traditions, rich in its institutions. And even with time making its inevitable changes, the Boston I know and the Boston I remember, well, that's Boston. And that's the way it was.
It was a time of depression, but you know, we had enough to eat. We never went hungry.
You got an apple for a nickel. You pay 50 cents for it today.
You know, hot dogs with Joe Nemo were a nickel and a dime at that time. You know.
No, and we always had milk and bread.
The war was over. Everyone was so grateful that if their boyfriend, their husband, their brother came home safe, and you were satisfied with a lot less.
You know the greatest advantage in those days? We didn't know we were poor.
We ended up feeding all the relatives, you know.
Yeah.
When their lights went out, you'd run a wire from one house to the other.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
So they'd have electricity.
Yeah. Well, you have bands every night, people walking up the street, everybody having a good time.
The 40s became the turning point of our country. We're out of the Depression years. Suddenly there's employment. People now have expendable income. We're coming of age in America. Coming of age. The war was over. Many of us were restless. Restless. What do we do our lives now? We've survived.
Boston in the 40s. Hard to believe it was just 50 years ago. Yes, Joe Nemo hot dogs were a nickel. Trolley rides a dime. But if you really want to tell the story of a very different era, consider this. The Customs House Tower was the tallest building in Boston. Rent for an apartment in a triple-decker, $50 a month. A house in the suburbs sold for about $10,000. A new Buick cost $900. And to fill the tank, $1.50. The typical Boston Irish Saturday night dinner was baked beans and brown bread. A pack of Lucky Strikes cost 15 cents. And a lady's dress from Feline's basement was indeed a bargain at $5. A secretary's salary was about $25 a week. And it was a pretty good bet that she pulled the lever for James Michael Curley in the last mayoral election.
And dump his rotten carcass in Boston Harbor.
If James Michael Curley was the people's mayor of Boston past, then Scollay Square was the people's soul.
It was every man's place. And you didn't get treated slight for going in.
Scollay Square
was the closest thing to a four-letter word that you could have had?
You see GIs come down Washington Street. Hey, bud, where's up? Just go up there, take a left, and you're in it. And of course, that was at night. It was mad.
There was a hustle and bustle around the square, and people would go up to Joe Nemo's, who was on the corner of a small street, and they'd get the most delicious hot dogs there that you could ever want to get, and for 10 cents you get a hot dog and a glass of soda. It was a pleasure watching the man deliver the hot dog to you. First, he'd take the bun out of a container, a steamed container. He'd take the bun out. Then he'd open it up. Then he'd put in, he did this so quickly that you could hardly keep up with him. But he'd put a spoon into the onions, chopped onions, and he'd put them in first. Then he'd get another spoon with relish and put on top of that. He'd put the hot dog on. Then with a paintbrush, dipped in mustard, he'd paint a strip of mustard across the top.
Scollay Square got its name from Colonel William Scollay, a real estate mogul of the 1790s. Over the years, the square was home to Yankees and to immigrants, to actors and inventors. Thomas Edison made his first patented invention here. It was the automatic vote counter. Today, some reminders of yesteryear still haunt Scollay Square. The steaming tea kettle that was first hung in 1875, and the mosaic tiles of Scollay Square under, the first subway in Boston. And as for old Charlie, well, who knows? He may still be riding on the MTA.
He may ride forever beneath the streets of Boston. He's the man who never returned. He's the man who never returned. He's the man who never...
But it was burly, it was burlesque that brought the sailors flocking to Scollay Square.
A triumphant homecoming for the Coast Guard cutters Taurus and Bramble as they steam into Boston Harbor after circumnavigating the North.
This is where I used to stop all the time to get my jobs, right here. Then I go down that way. Who's gonna go now?
You pick up your fares here, then?
Yeah, well, from here to Army Base.
Rosie LaCours remembers Scollay Square well. She drove a cab in Boston for 50 years.
This is the area of Scollay Square, and over there on the left is where the old tattoo places used to be here, and Sally Rand and all of them.
That's Sally Rand, as in fan dancing. And then, of course, there was the other Sally, Sally Keith, as in tassels.
I saw her once or twice, and she had these tassels.
Yeah.
And they would move.
Going
she was remarkable.
opposite
yeah,
directions.
Opposite. Yeah.
And how she could
talented.
stop on the Staten was something nobody could find out.
Yeah.
Not a seat was empty when Sally and her tassels played the Crawford House, one of Scollay Square's 3 burlesque theaters. And if you timed it right, you could catch the queen of Scollay Square, Ann Corio, just up the street at the Old Howard.
Well, the one I remember the most is Ann Corio. I can't think of the names of the other ones. We used to tell her to take it off, but she wouldn't.
The straight man would sing "A Pretty Girl Is Like a Melody," and she'd just walk around. And slowly, without even knowing it, the clothes would come off.
My line was, I can't take that off.
I'll catch cold, you know.
I'll catch cold.
Ralph Sayre was a film projectionist at the Old Howard.
She always had something new and something exciting. And, of course, a burlesque audience doesn't care about the quality of the dance very much. They weren't interested in that. They were only interested in the final result.
And when the final result went too far, Then the Watch and Ward Society, the self-appointed keepers of the public morality, would send in the city censors.
The doorman, who was hired, especially because he knew all the censors in town, would have a little button by the door that he would press whenever a censor came into the theater. And immediately, a little red light would flash on and off in the center of the footlights, and a buzzer would sound backstage. Everybody backstage was hollering, "Sunday school, Sunday school."
He would hit that button, the light would go on, and from doing an act, if a girl was doing a strip, it would become Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm.
The building that became the Old Howard originally was a church built in the 1840s. But the congregation's minister, warning that Judgment Day was near, soon lost his flock when his prediction failed. 60 years later, many who entered the Old Howard thought that they had died and had gone to heaven.
All you would see was shiny heads inside the theater there, the bald heads, they were all there.
So too were the women, and not just as strippers, but as spectators. But it was not until the 40s that the Old Howard finally put in ladies' rooms.
You never go in there alone. You always had 3 or 4 with you in the group. Yeah, we went in with girls. The men would be down on the floor. We'd be in the best seats in the house in the balcony, and they were looking up.
They have the curtain here, all right? And then they put their leg on it. And they go up and down and up and down, and oh my God, and the guys are goo and gar and woo and all that, and all the bald heads are shiny.
I never went there.
If you ever spoke to the men, they never went for the strippers. They went for the comics.
You could only get in if you looked old enough, so those years you wore reversible coats, you know, raincoat one side and tweed. You put up the collar, you hide your school books underneath. You could only do this in late fall and the winter. Go, "One ticket, please."
You'd see just about everyone. There was no special class that went there. You'd see the affluent, you'd see the poor, and you'd see all in between.
Even Mrs. Harriet Ropes Cabot of Beacon Hill paid the $2 for a seat.
Well, I didn't think it was very exciting, frankly. Well, I mean, it was nice, healthy-looking girls kicking their heels up. I don't remember seeing anybody there that we knew. I can't remember. But as I say, I was alone with 5 men, something like
5
that.
geologists, actually, who were visiting Mrs. Cabot's husband. It was no coincidence that the Old Howard was nicknamed the Old Harvard. Many a Crimson student, and even some professors, it was rumored, crossed the Charles for burly distractions. And a certain undergraduate became one of the regulars.
Harvard boys.
And you know who was one of the biggest in the days of Ann's Old Howard days? JFK, who was at Harvard at the time.
Yes.
Now, we can tell this, he's been gone for a while, bless his soul, but he was in love with one of the strippers by the unlikely name of Peaches Strange. All the Harvard boys, including JFK, who was there at the time, made it the place to go.
But not this professor, says John Kenneth Galbraith, who had just married Kitty Galbraith only a few years before.
I was much too virtuous to go to the Old Howard, and as far as I recall, that was the only reason people ever went to Scollay Square. Was there anything else?
In the 40s, if Scollay Square was known for burlesque, the South End was known for jazz. Places like Wally's, the Hi-Hat, the Wigwam served up the music.
Couples and singles. After you get through work, you get dressed and come down with your lady and sit in the club, you know, or listen to the music. You know? Everybody dressed up. Oh, ladies was in their furs and heels. Everybody.
Yeah, he's sharp dude.
High.
Yeah.
Oh, you had to be dabbed when you came out, you know? Everything was popping, you know?
Well, it was so popular until the musicians.
Right.
And you could not go on a job unless you had a necktie on. In fact, the standard uniform was a blue suit, a white shirt, and a necktie. It wasn't like today. You couldn't play a job unless you was dressed that way.
Most of the club had to sign a dress code, but you didn't have that. They didn't need that because everybody came dressed. Out for evening. That's right. That's what it really
All of these places, with the exception of Wallace and the Savoy, had black, how you say, entertainers, but you were not welcome in there. Oh, yes.
Ray Barron booked the jazz concerts at the Hi-Hat from 1947 to 1949.
You could feel the bigotry in the city. Well, some people say everyone knows their place. You would never see someone colored going into the Metropolitan Theater, the RKO. These people never had an opportunity, even if they had the income, because they knew it was off limits.
It was segregated. We didn't run into it maybe as much, but it was segregated.
Well,
I mean, you're talking about the 40s now. We know what the 40s was. Even if he associated with a few of them, there was places that you just didn't want to go. The area has changed and the people has changed.
What is for the better or for the worse?
We don't know. You do this.
The clubs have changed too. 97-year-old Wally Wolcott is the last of the jazz club owners in Boston's South End. As for Scollay Square and the Old Howard, well, the end of the war meant the end of an era. With no more sailors docking in Boston's Barbary Coast, the footlights slowly but surely went dark.
I'm still in love with the old Howard.
Yeah,
But there's no old Howard anymore.
Yeah.
On June 20, 1961, after several years of trying to preserve the Old Howard, it was destroyed by fire. Frank Hatch's father, Francis, Harvard class of 1919, led the crusade to save the Old Howard.
When the theater was burned, he was obviously upset, extremely disappointed, but instead of just sulking, he went home and wrote a song and the lyrics. And I will now give you the lyrics, which go like this.
Boston has two Athenaeums, both on Beacon Hill. One is for scholars with books by the score, the other for lads who seek life in the raw. The Boston Athenaeum's lights are bright, but the Howard Athenaeum's closed up tight.
Then the chorus went like this. Some coward closed the Old Howard. They're hanging crepe on Scollay Square. World tension makes the suspension almost more than we can bear.
What's become of Flo Laverne and Peachy de la Rose, brooding with the unemployed, wearing all their clothes? Some dastard went ahead and plastered a sheriff's notice on the door. Some coward closed the Old Howard. We don't have Burley anymore, and we've lost Curly. We don't have Burley anymore. Some coward closed the Old Howard.
We don't have Burley anymore.
He poked feebly at balls he formerly would have smashed out of the ballpark. Sorrowfully, the Sultan of Swat realized that the time had come to quit. It was a relief to drop the Braves uniform on the bench, for in his heart, Babe Ruth had never stopped being a Yankee.
Babe Ruth was 40 years old when he retired from baseball in 1935 after a career that started in Boston and ended here. And his salary that final year? $35,000. On opening day, the Babe even hit a home run. But by the end of the season, he said goodbye to baseball forever. The last uniform he wore said Braves, Boston Braves.
When the umpire shouts, play ball!
This is Jim Britt bringing you the story of the Braves family direct from the Wigwam in Boston.
Car giveaways and Fan Appreciation Day, two things that were standard fare in the days of the Braves. This was a team that called their fans family.
This, then, is the Braves family.
And believed in making their fans feel good about a visit to the Wigwam.
The owners of the Braves decided to show their gratitude to tribal fans by giving away a Packard Deluxe sedan to a lucky ticket holder.
Over the years, the Braves were known by various names. The Red Caps, the Red Stockings, the Doves, the Rustlers. But their identity as Braves, very politically incorrect by today's standards, was perfectly acceptable in the 1920s. Until the 1930s, their home ballpark near Boston University was the largest major league field in the country. A box seat cost $2, a grandstand $1, and a bleacher seat only 50 cents. No wonder the fans couldn't wait until opening day.
I guess it must have been in 1927 was the first time that I went to a ball game. I used to see the Braves, and we used to go up that big ramp up to the grandstand, and that was the greatest thing in the world, walking up the ramp and looking out in the field and watching the players practice. It was just one. I couldn't wait to get in.
I liked the Braves far better than the Red Sox.
I did too.
Yeah, they were, somehow or other, they had a different feeling at that ballpark. There was a warmer feeling. At Fenway Park, you were just sitting there, and you weren't part of the game somehow or other. But at Braves, you got right into it, and somehow or other the ball players would look up to you and wave to you, even though they didn't know you from a hole in the wall.
Here, Bob at Wright and Tommy Holmes give a few tips to some Braves of the future. Neither of these stars was ever too busy to give helpful hints to boys. More than 1,278,000 members of the family saw their favorites at the Wigwam.
Oh, I always had a great feeling. I just felt I was at home. You know, even the ushers were friendly. The security there, everybody was so solicitous of our well-being. You walked in and you sort of had the place to yourself, and we would get there early and we would walk all around the park. The Braves dugout was on third base, and we would sit in a box seat and talk to the players.
I remember the very first game I went to, and the field itself was just, it took me by awe. It was so huge, and the game in itself was just something that I just didn't believe, you know, made me an instant fan. When my father saw that I was quite interested into the Boston Braves, he immediately went to, picked up registered me as a Nuthole Gang member. I think it cost him $1 for the card for the whole year. And what the Braves used to do used to let us young fellows into the left field pavilion, because they never used the left field pavilion anyways. And that's where we used to go and watch the ball games, and we were allowed into the games free as long as we had that card.
More than 30,000 saw 10-year-old Lewis Cohen of the South End Boys Club present a hand-carved plaque to Billy Southworth.
Addisy Fox Allen belonged to the class of '42 at the Jeremiah E. Burke School for Girls. She was a die-hard Braves fan who says that the Braves were in her destiny.
We had a class prophecy, and we all contributed to this, but some of them said, you know, as they looked into the crystal ball, they saw there was Addisy Fox, the first woman sports announcer. And when I think back now, I laugh.
A medical technician at Harvard Medical School Addisy attended as many Braves games as she could. Her favorite player, Tommy Holmes.
This is Tommy Holmes, longtime Braves favorite.
At every game, he and his teammates would look up for Addisy and for Lolly Hopkins, the lady with the Tootsie Rolls.
Lolly would come armed with Tootsie Rolls and would throw them out to the visiting teams. The local team she would give during batting practice, and the visiting team she would throw them out in between, you know, as they were approaching the bench, coming in off the field.
Lolly Hopkins was a great fan of the Braves, and she was there at every game with her megaphone, and whenever Tommy Holmes, one of the other ball players, would get a hit or something, she would yell it out, and naturally she'd have the backing of all the other fans behind her, and many of the ball players just would smile back or wave back to Lolly and the fans. It was, as we always said, it seems though the Braves and the fans were much closer to, you know, there was like a family.
I, felt this kinship to her and never questioned the fact that these women were going out to ball games and so forth, unescorted or being subject to criticism or talk.
In fact, it was quite the opposite. During a morning practice session in 1947, Tommy Holmes presented Lolly Hopkins an appreciation gift.
The players didn't want any fanfare. They, in a quiet sort of way, merely wanted to let Lolly know how deeply they appreciated her loyal support.
I met all of the prominent sports writers, and they all called me Young Hammy. I called my dad Hammy.
When Jack Hamilton went to watch the Braves, he sat in the press box with his dad, Billy Hamilton, who was the sports editor at the Herald Traveler.
I had entree to the garden, to the arena, to every place, because I'd just show up. Oh, this is Hammy's kid. Thank you. Walk in, I'd take a pal with me. The kids used to fight to come with me.
Another was Manny Fernandez's thriller against Brooklyn, when his perfect stop and throw...
By the time he was a teenager, Hammy's kid got a job as a scorekeeper at Braves Field. But more than a few times, the fan in him got the better of his attention. And what showed up on the manual scoreboard was proof of that.
I had to watch the umpire, and I'd do it. And if I was wrong, there would be a buzz. In the meantime, I'm so interested in watching them and saying, come on. I forget to put up the names of the teams that are coming. So I get a call, hey, get on the ball, put the teams up that are coming. So Nick, what's his name, the cartoonist for the Globe, Gene Mack, the next day had a little bit in his cartoon. The scoreboard boy put two new teams into the league, Washland and Cleavington.
Everybody loved the Braves, and that was the year that the Red Sox lost the playoff to Cleveland Indians. They would have been a Boston World Series, but they lost the playoff that day. And the Braves just weren't good enough to beat the Indians. They had Spahn and Sane, but the Indians were a little bit better.
We had people, ball players like Alvin Dark and Eddie Stanky and Bob Elliott and Tommy Holmes, Earl Torgerson. They all just got together and just had a terrific year. It was just disappointing that they lost the World Series, but just nevertheless they did win the pennant, and they did get into the World Series, and that was quite a thrill.
The Whites included Billy Southworth, Johnny Cooney, Ernie White, Phil Macy.
Although 1948 didn't bring Boston a city series, the Red Sox also lost in the playoffs. But the Braves did bring a closeness to their fans that was unusual in the 40s and is long gone by the 90s. By 1953, Boston could no longer support two major leagues, and so the Braves were sold to Milwaukee.
1953, it was just real empty there. The grass was growing, the grass was so high, and it looked like a vacant, someone just packed up and left. It's so sad every time I go there and see that the Braves have moved, because that was my youth there. And I remember many a days just standing on Babcock Street, waiting for the ball players to come in to get their autographs.
As a parting thought to you young ball players, if you play good heads-up baseball and develop the 4 fundamentals, which are to be able to run, throw, field, and hit, you will help yourself to a baseball career.
The players, when I was a fan, they played in the hot sun, not at night like these guys do. They traveled by train, not by plane, you know. Well, it was, you know, in those days, they went by train. And, you know, they played every single day and didn't complain. If they did, they kept it to themselves. It wouldn't have done them any good anyway.
Love in the 40s. You went to Revere Beach with your date, and you held each other's hands, and you walked along the shore, squeezing one another's hands. That was love.
We really didn't have anything. You made your own games. And we'd sit on the porch and in the back there, and we'd have the watermelon, and we'd split it up between all the kids, and we'd be eating watermelon and talking about probably the Braves or the Red Sox or Glenn Miller, as they say, and so forth. Everybody had a nickname. I don't think I knew anybody's name. Shorty and Weasel and Snaky, and really, and nobody objected to it.
So we forgot we were poor in them days, but we managed to get down the beach, and even if we didn't have any money, we'd get down and go swimming, you know, we'd walk it.
The greatest thing they had was nickel day. I mean, that's what we lived for. I mean, Sunday, the paper came out with a whole 3 or 4 pages.
Everything was a nickel.
With coupons, and everything was a nickel.
It was a great way to pass the evening. And as you went by the dance halls, you could always, as a youngster, you'd always hear the beautiful bands and the music coming out. Go past a few of the stands and you'd smell the popcorn and the hot dogs and the different food cooking up. And as you went further down, you would hit to Shirley Avenue and you'd hear the noise of the roller coasters. And you stay and watch the big gap wide open looking at the roller coasters coming down, the people going up and screaming off the cars.
Since Revere Beach opened at the turn of the century, the beach was always free. Rides were a quarter, except on Nickel Day that was made popular during the Depression. And there was rich vanilla custard cones, a dime. The boardwalk was filled with fun houses, dance pavilions, and amusements for the young and the foolish.
You pays your money and you takes your choice. You can be spun, banged, turned upside down, or half killed.
Norman Gautreaux grew up in Lynn. He remembers taking the narrow gauge to America's playground.
My mom, if she could scrape up $3 or $4 to take us to the beach, we had 4 kids. I had 2 sisters and a brother. My mother would take the 4 of us to Revere Beach. We'd walk down Market Street from narrow gauge.
Did I love the smell of that smoke from the old Narrow Gauge? Because that was taking me to Revere Beach.
During World War II, the lights at Revere Beach would go out at dusk. It was feared that the lights would put ships located off the coast in danger of submarine attacks. Before the war, the most dangerous threat was exposure of a different kind. The first woman to wear a one-piece bathing suit in public was arrested at Revere Beach. Until 1937, it was illegal for men to go shirtless on the beach. This made the rental of bathing suits, woolen ones, a thriving business at 25 cents an hour.
They'd rent the bathing suits, and when the time was up, they'd bring them back in, and they'd put them upstairs to the laundry, and some of the senior citizens of Revere would be working, or people would be working upstairs in the laundry, and they would wash them, dry them. If they needed to be sewed, mended, they'd mend them, and then put them down the chute, and the next person in line would hire the bathing suit.
And how did the swimmer know when the time was up?
The clock faced the ocean because it told the people who rented the bathing suits what time they had to bring them back in again. That was the big deal. They never relented, and it still faces the ocean today, and they don't rent out bathing suits.
No need to. The beach as we know it, the rides, the boardwalks, they're all gone. When it closed in 1973, Revere Beach left behind a legacy of thrills and memories.
There was so much amusement, you could say. The kids, your eyes would be wide open there, looking at the different mirrors with the fat people and the skinny people and the funny mirrors. And it was always something as you walked the whole beach. You just go from one step, another 10 steps, you'd see something different. And you get the freak shows, and it was just so great. That's what the kids are missing today.
It was something that the kids could enjoy. It was a place to go. I mean, you know, you can complain all you want about the kiddos today, but what do they got? Where do they go? You know, they have no place to go. You know, all good things have to come to an end, and that was a great thing.
Like the cod, the number of proper Bostonians is dwindling. At the beginning of the century, when Harriet Ropes was born, prominent Yankee families were not only prolific, they also wielded the financial power in Boston. When Harriet Ropes married a Cabot, she was guaranteed not only a place in Boston society, but in New England.
Of course, that's what happened to most of the girls, at least of my generation in Boston, who they encountered boys at Harvard or wherever from somewhere else. And so they left when they got married and never came back.
The Boston Mrs. Cabot grew up in was filled with dinner parties, trips to Europe, Harvard football games, and the much-awaited coming-out parties. Reading from her diary, written when she was 16 years old, Mrs. Cabot recalls a life of privilege and class. It was an era when meeting and greeting became an art form.
I had a dinner before the brattle. This is Saturday 14, whatever that must be, 14th of October, I suppose, before the brattle. And then there's a map showing my parents at each end of the table. The social life, I mean, what they meant was to introduce you to both the young and the old of that era. And but it ended up by being a grand good time, mostly. Went to Yale game with Goddard. That's Goddard Wright. Thornton, who was Thornton Coolidge, who was my cousin, and Alan Whiting, who was his roommate, I think, came to lunch too. Harvard 0, Yale 0. Great game. The purpose of coming out was to introduce you to society as such, and I think it's also to give you some experience. In those days, you didn't go and work somewhere, so it gave you something to do, I think. Also, the families could show off their daughters. It was a marriage mart.
The Boston Mrs. Cabot remembers meant a leisurely lunch at Lockover's. Upstairs, of course, women weren't allowed anywhere else. And snow trains to the mountains, with skiing at her family's camp in the Adirondacks. This is the Boston 86-year-old Mrs. Cabot was a part of.
Well, we took the subway in from Cambridge to the North Station, and at least I did, lugging skis. And then you got on this very overheated train.
The dividing line between the Yankee world of Mrs. Cabot and the world of the Boston Irish was James Michael Curley. During his 4 terms as mayor and single term as governor, Curley may have been loved, he may have been hated, but he was never duplicated.
Well, he was a prominent-looking person, full face. He was a guy that used to steal from one and give to the other. He went to jail for 6 months on account of it. He went to jail because he was trying to feed the poor people.
He was an enormously entertaining figure, a great actor. He once read Shakespeare here at Harvard, and everybody was stunned at the mastery of language that Jim Curley displayed. But he could also, there was also another side. I remember, must have been shortly after I came here, somebody told me about going to a meeting out in one of the Boston suburbs. And Curley had arranged it all. And after he spoke, somebody got up and said, "Governor, Mr. Curley, is it true that you once took a civil service examination and suffered prison sentence for that?" And Curley, it was all arranged that he be asked that. Curley wiped his eyes, paused for a moment and said, "It is true, my friend. It is true. And do you know what the circumstances were? I did it for a friend."
He was good. He was good. In fact, if he was still alive, I think he'd still be mayor.
We were enclosed. There was a nice thick drape, and behind it, which was a sheer, something like this one. And exactly 8:30, I just point to Joe McDonald, our drummer, and he'd start his roll on a tom-tom. And he'd go to a beat, thump, 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 thump. This is Totem Pole, you know, thump, 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 thump. Now the trombones would come in. I had 3 trombones, and they had these plungers they would put in front of the bell, and they go, do-wah, 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 like that. So we have a date. We're going to the pole, quotes. That was the pole. That was the key word. You said the pole. Everybody universally knew what we were talking about. So you get on a streetcar, and the girl's well-dressed, beautifully attired, and the guy does the best he can. And you get on a subway, and then you take this long streetcar up Commonwealth Avenue, and the stop was named Norumbega. You get off at Norumbega and you trekked to the ticket office and you went up this long walk. If it was raining or snowing out, so what? And then you got into the Totem Pole. There were dance halls, there were ballrooms, talking hierarchy now, and there was the Totem Pole. That was the jewel in the crown. That was so far above it. I don't think people considered it to be a dance hall. It was a ballroom, a very special place. Some of you probably danced to these a few years ago, and we welcome you back to the dance floor.
For a cold, icy December, the dance floor is pretty warm this Sunday afternoon. 400 folks from Greater Boston have come to dance and remember, to relive the Totem Pole, what Variety magazine called the most beautiful dance hall in America.
Saturday nights was the best time, and we met all our friends there.
I mean, if you had a date and your date took you to the Totem Pole, you felt like you had it made.
Most of the people, rather than dancing, they'd stand around and just listen to Tommy Dorsey and Jimmy Dorsey, and it'll never be the same again.
We met on the Totem Pole when we were very young, you know, and I fell in love with her the first time that I saw her. And I said, please, say yes, and I love you, and I want to marry you. And she,
I kept refusing him.
And she got bashful for a change, and she said, yes, I love you.
People always find ways to enjoy their life, or something to look forward to. You always knew the Totem Pole was stable. I always knew you could go there.
You want to see the band you've heard? Well, here's the message, pass the word. After that you go, you find it toting at the Totem Pole. You want some fun, you want to dance, you want that spirit called romance. You want some play, new and old, just ask Freddie Guerra at the Totem Pole. Brand new Route 128 to get you there and you won't be late. Take it easy, driving along, the band will play your favorite song. Take your friends beyond your way, dance be merry, dance be gay, thrilling right from head to toe, the totem at the Totem Pole. Take Route 128, take Route 128, take Route 128, take Route 128.
Artie Shaw, Benny Goodman, Harry James, Woody Herman, the Dorsey brothers. How can I resist saying it? They just don't make music like this anymore. This was music you could dance to. This was music that made the night go on forever. This was romance.
What they used to say, got about the sweetest music this side of heaven.
It was a very special kind of place. And even all these years later, you get a warm glow when you think about it.
The Totem Pole opened in 1930 in Newton, inside Norumbega Park. The pole, as it was called, had a few house rules. No stags, couples only, jacket and tie for the men, nylon stockings, no bobby socks for women. Absolutely no alcohol and no breaking, that's jitterbugging, was allowed. Admission was $1.75 a couple, except on New Year's Eve. That night, it went up to $3.
It was exciting, especially for me from Dorchester, which was a good half hour away. And to be able to go there, it was just so beautiful. You thought you were in heaven, really, with the lights, and then you had these very deep, soft couches that you would sit on between dances.
High sides around it.
Yeah.
And you sit in there and
maybe have a kiss, steal a little kiss, which we thought was so daring, you know.
Oh, yes, the couches. I forgot to mention the famed Totem Pole couches.
I remember them gray. I don't know, like a gray velvet plush, and you sank into them. And it was very private when you sat in one of those.
You could reserve a sofa for the evening. The cost back in the late 30s, early mid-40s was $1 for a 4-person sofa, one of the big divans, or 50 cents for a 2-person love seat.
We'd go after the Boston College football games. Every Saturday night would be over at the Totem Pole, and they had the settees on, and it was banked, and it was very private, very cozy.
The sofas were for sitting on, nothing else. There was no funny business going on there, believe it or not.
It was the second day, and we went to the Totem Pole. I had met him, and I liked him, but we went there, we did a few dances, we sat down, he fell asleep.
On the divan.
On the beautiful lounge that was there. And it took a lot of thinking whether to see this man again. But I did the 3rd time and the 4th time, and we've been married 56 years.
Next to each sofa was a small table with a lamp on it, with an on-off switch. That didn't work out particularly well because young couples sitting in the sofas and desiring a little privacy would switch off the light. This caused problems, people walking up and down the aisles and tripping over coats and feet and whatever. So by the 2nd year of the ballroom's existence, they replaced those lamps with new lamps, all with a single on-off switch located in the spotlight booth. Well, that didn't work particularly well either because it didn't take Yankee ingenuity being what it is. It didn't take the youngsters long to realize they could unscrew the light bulb and create the same effect. So for most of the years of the ballroom's existence, each summer the management would hire a young man, and perhaps it was his first job at the age of 14 or 15, whose only responsibility all night long was to go up and down those aisles screwing the light bulbs back in. But little did people know, while they were snuggling in their sofa, the orchestra was battling bats.
And I'd be playing a piano solo, and this is a true story, and many times a bat would come zoom right in front of my eyes, and the guys in the band group, they'd make a sound effect with it, like, whoa! Now the kids dancing out there, they don't know this is happening. I don't think I ever heard anyone mention the bats at the Totem Pole.
Today, the Totem Pole is a memory. Just like the Old Howard, the Braves, Revere Beach, and the South End Jazz Clubs. On February the 8th, 1964, Bob Batchelder and his orchestra played their final song.
There were no tears shed. It was just the end of a ball. Funny. There were no press there to cover it. We just stopped playing. It ran down and nobody rewound it. That was the end of the Totem Pole. I get a lump in my throat when I talk about it because people still say, "You're going to do 99." And they knew by the clock anyway. And we would sing 99, 99. And by the second bar, the audience was swaying with us because we'd be rocking back and forth until tomorrow. When you have, 17 or 18 guys all singing this unison, then the girl would come in the middle and say, "For the time has come to leave you. It's not goodbye, it's just so long."
A year after those final notes were played, a fire gutted the Totem Pole. And so ended the era of ballroom dancing at Norumbega Park.
Boston, the landmarks are still there. Still a city of mortar, steel, glass, but what we do with our free time has changed.
People all have apartments. There's factories in here now and apartments. The old dry docks is all gone. This whole place has changed here. We don't know where you're going anymore now.
We have lost a lot, but we couldn't stop it. It's progress. And time does not stand still forever, you know. So you remember the good days and hope that some of the good people are still living, you know, and pray and hope for the best.
I assume everybody has heard the old Boston verse. Here's to the city of Boston, home of the bean and the cod, where the Lowells speak only to Cabots and the Cabots speak only to God. But that has disappeared from sight. Nobody recites that anymore. Everybody recited it in those days. And now I'm told that the most recent version is, here is to good old Dame Boston, city of culture and fun, where the Lowells are second to the Cabots and the living costs second to none.